issues without having to bother about the border. There will be some problems, there are problems because, as I've said, the definition of border did not exist in the minds of people. We addressed the land boundary issue, complicated. But this is one of the rare water bodies, perhaps the only, I may be wrong, please correct me if I am, which is dispute-free. The Bay of Bengal is dispute-free. We had issues with Myanmar, we had issues with India, India had issues with Myanmar and issues with us. There was a suggestion, why don't we solve it bilaterally? I said, fine. And then I said, okay, whatever we do, this is such a contentious issue. Whatever I agree to, we have a divided polity. The other side will say, you sold our interest. Let an impartial body decide. And so we went to the instrument under UNCLOS. They would not accept it. First, we have to give in writing to them that you accept the jurisdiction of the UNCLOS. I see Kamal is sitting there, he will be aware of part of what happened with that. We had to both countries give in writing that yes, we accept the jurisdiction of the UNCLOS. The second condition was you will accept whatever award we give up. There is a good reason behind it. There can be arbitration. There has been arbitration in the South China Sea, but if one party does not accept it, and that's a powerful party, then that arbitration is good for nothing. So we can get on with life. We can address many other things. And I think we have, in a sense, come to the stage where these two agreements makes us a role model if you compare it with what does not exist in the other borders in the sea. And, I don't want to delve into that, that's beyond my jurisdiction, but at least we have ensured that we will not suffer. Role model means we have achieved the finality of relationship. But like human societies and human beings or any state, it's always work in progress. So there is no final word to being a role model. The nature of our terrain is such, the geomorphology of the terrain is such, that there are still problems we have to resolve. And we are working at it bilaterally. The biggest, I think, that yet remains to be worked on, there are two issues in my contention. One, of course, is we have to work together on climate change. And I think there are signs that we do in the international forum. The other is, we have in Bangladesh 405 rivers. There are 54 international rivers that we share with India. There are two eastern riverine rivers of the three. One goes into Burma, two goes through India, and they have no other way to go but through Bangladesh. Our Honorable Prime Minister, not very long ago, announced the Delta Plan 2021. What is the Delta Plan? Bangladesh is a delta country. What is a delta? It is formed by the confluence of the rivers and the siltation and the waters that come. The Delta Plan 2021 is predicated on the assumption that we will have addressed and come together to a formula which will enable us to address the rivers holistically as a basin and manage the rivers as we used to before the partition of 47 or the war of 1965. If that does not, it is both in India's and Bangladesh's interest And I say this with my good friend Pankaj Singh. He knows where I come from. This is one of the topics taken up when Prime Minister Selina went to India in 2010 January. And hopefully, if we have solved the two toughest problems, we will also resolve this thing. Here we have to take lessons from other regions of the world. The foremost lesson I will point once again is Europe. They fought 2 world wars in the last century. Before World War I, they fought 2 7-year wars. Before the 2 7-year wars, they fought various other wars with different configurations. But they had a treaty on both the Rhine and the Danube rivers from between 150 years to 200 years. During all the fighting, they did not touch the rivers, they did not touch the ecosystem. Collateral damage was there, but they did not touch the rivers or harm the rivers. They learned that that river is vital for all their existence. And so I am hopeful that as role models, we will graduate and progress from having resolved our land and maritime boundaries to also resolving the issues related to common, holistic management of the rivers that feed our populations on both sides. If we don't do that, the Delta plan is dead. I'm maybe being pessimistic, but that is what logic dictates. This is the Honorable Prime Minister's legacy to the country, which she has led for the last 15 years. And I hope it will work. Number 2, with the partition, you can partition the land. Can you partition the ecosystem? Can you partition the hydrosphere, the atmosphere? Can you partition the forestry, the wildlife? That's what we did. I'm heading a center called the Bay of Bengal, the Center of Studies. And I look at the map of the Sundarbans, East Sundarban and West Sundarban. Do the tigers which swim across the canals in the stream need a passport and visa to go? To stake the territory? Are we counting the tigers that belong to India, or is India counting the tigers belonging to us? You can get into a dispute easily at that lower level. These are my tigers and those are not. Over 150 years, we have already lost 50% of the Sundarbans. I've seen this from maps drawn by the British in 1780s or something. And we mapped just after partition. 50%. The loss has been not from the sea inwards. It has been from the land outwards. Sundarbans is mangrove. There's hundreds of species of mangroves. Wherever there's salt water, God has provided the mangrove. The mangroves sequester 3 to 4 times more carbon dioxide than normal trees. So when we are destroying one Sundari tree, we are reducing the sequestration of carbon dioxide 3 to 4 times over normal trees. This is something where we have an agreement signed in 2011. We need to make that operational fully. That will help us together to address the other deleterious effects of global warming. I have even proposed that all the Bay of Bengal littorals to begin with should take a collective decision to declare 5 miles of the coastal area along the entire coastal belt, ranging from Sri Lanka around to Indonesia, as mangrove protection belt. Just doing that alone will change the configuration of how much carbon dioxide we are absorbing and how little oxygen we are taking, because these trees also are oxygen neutral. They don't consume more oxygen than they need. So these are areas which I think are the way forward to perfecting, or I won't say perfecting, it's a superlative I don't want to use, because you put a border to how much you can achieve together. There are no limits to that. Our destinies are tied together by strands on the umbilical cord which will never really sever afterwards. What happens in you affects us, what happens here affects you. How we address it together will determine where it's the future can go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, His Excellency Parvin. It was possible to make this relation a role model for a wonderful ambassador like you. Please give a big hand for Mr. Parvin. You people have solved from Bengal to Sundarban, land to river, and all other states. And that was what we are feeling now, that India-Bangladesh relation became global. Thank you very much, Mr. Parvin, for giving your inspirational speech. Now I request Pankaj Sharan. Pankaj Sharan বাংলাদেশে দায়িত্ব পালন করেছেন 2013-14 সালে অত্যন্ত ক্রিটিক্যাল টাইম, এবং সেই সময় সম্পর্কে আমার কিছু বলার প্রয়োজন নেই। আপনাদের স্মৃতিতে গল্প করে সেই অবরোধ আন্দোলনের চেহারাগুলো নিশ্চয়ই আসছে, এবং সেই সময়ের মধ্যে একটি নির্বাচন অনুষ্ঠিত হয়েছে 14 সালের 5 জানুয়ারি। বাংলাদেশে একটা নতুন সরকার তার মাত্র 4 বছর ক্ষমতায় এসেছে 2008। And Pankaj Sharan is one of the few ambassadors who actually এই সম্পর্কের দিকগুলো পেতে পেতে সামনের দিকে অগ্রসর হয়েছে। আমি একটু Pankaj সম্পর্কে একটু বলি, তারপরে রিকোয়েস্ট to speak. Pankaj Sharan is a former diplomat with 40 years of experience in foreign, strategic and national security affairs. He has served in key positions within the government of India, in the Prime Minister Office, the National Security Council Secretariat, Ministry of External Affairs, and Indian Mission Abroad. He has served as Indian Ambassador to Russia, India's High Commissioner to Bangladesh, and head of the Northern Division in the Ministry of External Affairs, dealing Nepal and Bhutan. He has served in different capacities in the Prime Minister Office, contributing to decision making in the highest level of diverse range of sectors, including foreign affairs and national security. From 2018 to 2021, he served as a Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Affairs under Prime Minister's Narendra Modi's aid with regional and global strategic formulation, including maritime security, Arctic affairs, neighborhood policies, and technology and economic security also. Pankaj Sharan is presently convener of the United States and a commentator on security and strategic issues, and a distinguished fellow of the National Maritime Foundation. So, you know, the vast career in the diplomatic career. When he just arrived, he started 9 in this hotel, and he was working in this lobby. He was remembering all those days. You know, he had to deal Mr. Narendra Modi, Manmohan Singh, Pranab Mukherjee, Mamata Banerjee, all these had that time. Such a colorful time he passed during his tenure in Dhaka. And of course, I believe you are seeing all of your old friends here, from right to left. And time is yours, as much as you want to talk, and as much as our audience want to listen. Pankaj.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by a few introductory remarks, and then I will go on to some thoughts and reflections which I want to share with all of you. But first, just some introductory remarks. Firstly, it's a great honor and always a pleasure to be back in this beautiful city and country, which is throbbing with energy and dynamism. I want to particularly thank Mr. Sabir Hussain Chaudhary for being present today. But most importantly, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the trouble and taking time out to be here this evening. There are so many old friends that I see in front of me that it's simply very difficult to name each one. But I just want to say I am completely overwhelmed by your presence, and it just shows how much respect and friendship we can develop with each other, regardless of our official positions. And that really is the most important. So thank you so much for being here today. Day before yesterday, both our countries celebrated Victory Day on December 16th. It is fitting that we have this discussion today. There is a lot that we can be proud of for our individual and collective achievements. And India will always be proud of the fact that it played a role in the liberation of Bangladesh and helped the people of Bangladesh to win freedom from oppression and regain their dignity and identity. Developments since then have proved and shown which country was on the right side of history and who was on the wrong side. India and the people of Bangladesh were on the right side of history. But there were powerful forces and geopolitical alignments that ignored the realities on the ground and tried to thwart the wishes of the people. But they could not stop the march of events because of the simple reason that the moral force was overwhelming. The sacrifices of those months and years have been vindicated by time and events. The world today is witness to the progress that Bangladesh has made in the last 50 years, which at one point in time was described as a basket case. It was this strength of conviction that Zahur Hussain Chaudhary brought to his writings and profession, starting from The Statesman and then as editor of the Sangbadik. His writings captured the spirit of the times and inspired millions who read his works. The impact of his work was all the more remarkable because it did not have the advantage of the digital age. So I therefore would like to express special gratitude to Shahid and to Bhorer Kagoj for inviting me to honor not just one of Bangladesh's great journalists, but among the greatest in our region. And lastly, I'm delighted to be in the company of my dear friend and distinguished diplomat and scholar Tariq Karim, who has left an indelible mark on our relationship. So, Tariq has laid out a lot of the issues in the relationship. I thought I would reflect on some of the philosophical points that he has talked about, and also deal with some of the operational points. But I would also like to share with this audience some of my own personal experiences and try to illustrate a few examples to bring out the, the relationship that exists between us. My first exposure to Bangladesh was in 1989. And I have seen this relationship for the last 35 years. And I have been involved in it in various capacities. I remember when I came for the first time to Dhaka in 1989, I was much younger and I couldn't understand why this is a foreign country and why we had an embassy here. I was innocent, I was bold, I was brash. It was the time of dictatorship. I am no longer in government. Many of the actors there at that time no longer exist, so one can be more open and frank. We were under surveillance as an embassy. I was young, as I said, and I was a little overwhelmed by what I saw. But I found that there was a big difference between the attitude of the state authorities and the common people in Dhaka. So while we were looked upon with great suspicion, even as a young first secretary, I spent one of my best social years in Dhaka in those 3.5, 4 years. We were invited to homes of Bangladeshis. We were treated as one. There was no, except for the language, which I didn't know very well at that time, but I took lessons to learn Bangla. There was no barrier which we felt when mixing around socially with everyone. And I remember, I don't remember his name, but some politician asked me when I gone to meet him, what is, in your opinion, the difference between Bangladesh and India? I think he knew it, he was just testing me. So I thought hard and I said, I really don't know, maybe it's just the religion. He said, exactly, it's the religion, but everything else is the same. And from then onwards, I followed and also participated in the building of the relationship. Those were difficult times for India. I was witness to the fall of President Ershad, 1991, his address on television. In fact, the whole democratic revolution came about at that time, and the first election was held, and we were there and we saw how the internal processes were unfolding, but also how the relationship with India was moving forward. When I was hearing Tariq, and when I come back here, and as Shamal said, there is a flood of memories that is coming back to me, sitting here exactly in this place. And I remember the whole series of Indian leaders who sat in this room and addressed and been, given banquets in this hall, and who have contributed to this whole march of history in making this relationship. It's actually remarkable, starting with, as Shaman was saying, Manmohan Singh, Pranab Mukherjee, Sushma Swaraj, Jai Shankar, and of course, Mr. Narendra Modi. They've all been here, in this hotel, in this hall. And I have had the privilege of working very, very closely to make sure that all their visits and everything else goes off well. So the point which strikes me every time is that this is a relationship which is so unique between India and Bangladesh that there is no other set of countries who are placed as we are. The fact is, and I agree, we share the same civilizational space, and there is no border as such that can divide us. And this is something which we must acknowledge and accept. And we need people on both sides to have this understanding about who we are and how we are placed. So, what makes a relationship modern? I mean, the question which is posed before us today is, this is a modern relationship. And I thought I'd just share with you what I think makes relationships good and maybe successful. I think the first and the most important is the ability to look at issues from each other's eyes. In other words, the ability for an Indian to see the Bangladeshi point of view and for a Bangladeshi to see the Indian point of view. This is easier said than done because sometimes we are prisoners of our own positions and we are not able to look at the same issue through the lens of the other side. At the moment we start doing that, the realization comes that yes, for every issue and for every problem, you can find a solution, but invariably, you cannot find a 100% solution, because a 100% solution means in any negotiation that one side is the loser and the other is the winner. So you have to find that sweet spot where both sides go back from the negotiating room thinking that they are both benefited from the dialogue. The second condition or attribute of a modern relationship is that both sides must agree on certain basic postulates or at least have some fundamental consensus about the relationship. In our case, I think the first postulate is and should be that the success of one side or one party means the success of the other party. In other words, we either swim together or we sink together. And ours can and must never be a zero-sum game. That is absolutely essential. Thirdly, there are some issues of immediate day-to-day nature. Tariq has mentioned a few of them. But there are others of a long-term strategic nature. When we look back with the kind of experience Tariq has, and you reflect back, not just 2 years ago, but you reflect back 2, 3, 4 decades, then what are the lessons you take from history about how you deal with current and future issues? So my submission to you is that even as we are tending to short-term and urgent matters, we should never lose sight of the long term, because it is possible that we may get lost in the short term. Fourth, any relationship to succeed needs hard work. It needs hard work to build, firstly, and then to sustain that relationship. And paradoxically, it needs much less effort to derail or spoil a relationship. So, hard work is critical, but I would say it is also not enough. It is said and believed that national interest is paramount, and it is important. Of course it is. That's stating the obvious. But my takeaway from this relationship is that personalities matter, and we know it on both sides of the border. To give you just one example, the land boundary agreement was pending for decades. The only reason it happened was because of the fact that there was an election in India in 2014. The party which won the election got an absolute majority, and the Prime Minister, who was first time Member of Parliament in India, would always serve in the states, never come to the center. He had the political courage to embark on a constitutional amendment, the amendment of the Indian Constitution. He had the political ability to talk to all the political parties, all the state governments, and ensure that whatever had to be done and could not be done for 40, 50 years was done. So for me, the question was, what was the difference between 2015 and let's say 10, 15, 20 years ago? The primary difference was the man at the top. He took the decision, he implemented it, and the reason why he did all that was because he believed that it was in the interest of both countries, in the interest of India and the region, that we at least solve one legacy of history and one legacy of partition which had plagued the relationship for decades. So I want to make the point that whether we like it or we don't like it, personalities matter. And this is true not just for India and Bangladesh, but for any country or any relationship. Similarly, circumstances matter. There are occasions in the lives of nations where circumstances are right, and sometimes you may have the right leadership or the right will, but the circumstances are not there. So in this particular case, you had a combination of circumstances both in India and in Dhaka, which enabled this deal to go through. And of course, you mentioned the maritime boundary. My last point is, in the case of India and Bangladesh, and in the case of any relationship, there will always be an unfinished agenda. Both countries will have constraints in meeting each other's needs and expectations. And we also have to be mature enough to realize that when we are trying to move this kind of a relationship forward, we have to accept that there are some realities over which we have no control. They are a given. 1947 was a given. 1971 became a given. So what can we do within the circumstances that are there in front of us today, and how best can we make the best of what we have? So this is a mature and a realistic version of policy where we can talk about what we would have wished, but that is not going to solve the problems. What we have to address and spend time is to focus on what we actually have and try to make the best of it. So why has this relationship been a success? That is a question which everyone will want to know, and is a question which is being asked not just in our region but everywhere in the world. I would say there are basically 4 reasons why we reached the kind of success that we had. First is clearly political will. You can have the best intentions, you can have the best agreements. The land boundary agreement of 1974 was a perfect agreement. The protocol was a perfect agreement, but it was an agreement on paper. So, what is the difference between success and lack of success? It is the political will. And I think from 2008 or 2009, there has been display of political will in Bangladesh, and most interestingly, there has been display of political will in India among all political parties. I remember when the 2014 election took place, I was in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. A lot of questions were asked to me by the media, by officials, that what would be the fate of the relationship now that the Congress party had lost and a new party and a new prime minister had come. and what would happen to the relationship. And I used to tell them, just wait and see. Don't jump to conclusions about intent and about past record. And the lesson in the last 15 years is that on the Indian side, the political leadership has actually gone even further in building the relationship with Bangladesh than its predecessor government. So if the relationship has not just maintained at the same level, but it has become even more intense in the last 15 years. And on the Bangladesh side, similarly, we have seen this display of political will at every juncture. I want to give the example also of the Teen Bhiga corridor. Some of you might remember that in the late 80s, mid-80s, the Teen Bhiga corridor was the number one political issue between India and Bangladesh. Generations of officials and diplomats and bureaucrats had sat and discussed how to do and solve the Teen Bhiga corridor and the transit and the lease and the bridge. I was there, and it was bitter, it led to a lot of problems, but finally, the Teen Bhiga corridor was solved in 1992 when Begum Khaleda Zia was Prime Minister. And in India, you had, again, a weak coalition government, but there was political will. 1996 was the Ganges Water Treaty. It was not a strong government in Delhi, it was a coalition, a weak coalition. And in Bangladesh also, you had a coalition government. So, political will is an essential condition for success. Second is, I think in the case of India and Bangladesh, all of you know the history, the border, the cross-border problems. I think in this particular relationship, one of the key reasons of success was the security compact that was arrived at between India and Bangladesh. And again, this was a function of the political will on both sides. Because as I said, and as Tariq rightly said, what happens in India doesn't stay in India, what happens in Bangladesh does not stay in Bangladesh. That's the nature of our geography and our reality. We will live with it, our future generations are going to live with it, and it is incumbent on some of us to address these issues. So I think the kind of compact that was arrived at paved the way for many, many things to move forward between the two countries. And today, the net result is that we have, generally speaking, peace on the border, much lower levels of cross-border crime, terror, and other activities. So both these lead to the convergence of national interests. That means any relationship to succeed, both sides must believe that their national interests converge, that they are not contradictory to each other. And I think in this case, in the last few years, we've had this convergence of national interests. And lastly, I think time is a great healer. You know, when we look back at the turbulent years of the 1970s and 80s and 90s, when Bangladesh was going through huge internal turmoil, disturbances, and India was going through its own problems. You know, we had our emergency in 1975, we had the assassination of two prime ministers, we had almost a full decade of the 90s where we had coalition governments and governments changing almost every 12 months. So India also went through. We had an economic collapse virtually in 1991, and Bangladesh was going through its own problems. But over time, we learned our lessons. Over time, our approach to national sovereignty has changed. The sovereignty was a hard-fought thing, whether it was for India, whether it's for Bangladesh, for any country. The question which arises is, how do we deal with that sovereignty? Do we make it an asset or do we make it a liability? And therefore, can we come and become more comfortable with our sovereignties, mutual sovereignties, and how quickly we are about each of them? And from that point of view is what I want to say, that time leads to maturity, it leads to adjustment, and also time contributes to generational change. The 1971 generation in Bangladesh or the 1947 generation in India is no more, practically speaking. We are talking of a new generation. And the new generation has different aspirations. It has different influences on its mind and different approaches to how to deal with their sovereignty. So what are the key features of this India-Bangladesh relationship? I want to begin by saying we must contrast it with, let's say, India's western border. India's western border and India's eastern borders, and by east I mean Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. And on the west I mean basically Pakistan and to some extent Afghanistan. They are a study in contrast. Today, the western border with India is shut and sealed and heavily militarized. The result is today for everyone to see. Pakistan today faces its gravest national crisis since its creation in 1947. Whether it is economic, whether it is political, or whether it is social. It is virtually, the relationship has virtually broken down with the Taliban in Afghanistan. The whole Pashtun identity has become the number one threat to the unity of Pakistan. This idea that religion or Islam can be the glue to keep a country together is once again, after 1971, coming into question. Any observer will tell you what is happening in Balochistan, what is happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, what is happening in Punjab, what is happening in Sindh. The TTP in Afghanistan is raising this whole issue of the Pashtun identity. Apart from that, the economy is in a state of complete collapse. I'm saying all this because that is an example of a border that is shut down with India. But on the other hand, you have Nepal, you have Bhutan, and you have Bangladesh, which represent exactly the opposite model, which is one of openness and trade and investment and people-to-people flows. So this is one feature of this India-Bangladesh relationship. Second feature is openness. The openness between India and Bangladesh is a relatively new trend. And this openness has manifested in many ways, both in the physical sense, but also in the terms of ideas, people-to-people contacts. The big story about the India-Bangladesh relationship, and again it comes down to the question of political will, is that we are currently, a lot of the effort is going on just to restore the connectivities that existed between India and Bangladesh before 1965. All that we are doing is trying to go back in time. We are actually not making additionalities, but we're just simply trying to say, let us go back to where we were before 1965. The other aspect of this relationship is integration, economic integration, financial integration, trade integration. And lastly, I would say sub-regional cooperation. We have decided that we will move forward by cooperating among a few countries, even if we cannot do cooperation on a full South Asian or a subcontinental frame, which we have tried to do, but which has failed. It has not succeeded. So we have found this other model of cooperation. But is it the case that we are all good? Certainly not. As I said, there is work in progress or an unfinished agenda, whichever way you want to put it. I would say the first, in my opinion, is the whole agenda of poverty and unemployment in both countries. We started the same economic levels because of colonialism. We have a serious problem of providing jobs, of skilling, of education, of poverty alleviation. That really is a fundamental problem. Second, as Tarek said, water. How do we handle our water resources? This is a subject which has constantly bedeviled the relationship. We have found solutions to some, but we haven't found to others. This is, I would say, work in progress. Third, trade imbalance is a problem between India and Bangladesh. Trade has grown, but it is imbalanced, and we have to find a solution. Now, Tariq mentioned about India-China, or let us say China-USA or China-Europe, etc. There is imbalance. We have to find creative, innovative ways to address those issues. Environment, again, was mentioned. Critical problem. I don't think we have understood the gravity of it. Climate change, environment, Sundarbans, salinity, everything, that whole area, we have not done what we should be doing. Blue economy, again, very understated. We have so far focused a lot of our energy on the land border. We have not yet focused enough on the blue economy on the Bay of Bengal. Border management is an issue. We have gone through different phases of an unfenced border, then partially fenced, almost fully fenced. There is management, there are incidents. We have to deal with all of them. We've tried, we have excellent mechanisms for meetings regularly between border security forces. But again, this is, I would describe it as work in progress, unfinished agenda. And my final thoughts about the future. And before I come to that, I just want to also make a mention of 2-3 other elements which are part of this whole thing. One is, while we have people to people, we have visa, we have movement, we have made progress on that, but yet we have problems of illegal migration. We both face problems of handling our individual minorities. This impacts the relationship, and we should be talking about it candidly and openly without allowing emotion or sentiment to come in the way. But we are a multi-plural, multicultural society in India. You are equally a multi-plural, multicultural society. And this is again a legacy of how the British decided to leave the subcontinent. Final thoughts. I think one, for the future, we have to find a way of dealing with each other. That means both our problems and our successes. Tariq mentioned, it is imperative that we both deal with each other directly. We don't go through third countries, third parties, but we talk to each other directly. Whether it is easy or not so easy, but that is the only way. We have to make progress in the relationship self-sustaining. We have to make sure it acquires a momentum of its own. And lastly, that somehow the progress becomes irreversible. We do not want a situation where the relationship swings from one extreme to the other. Tariq talked a lot about wars. I don't think India and Bangladesh are ever going to go to war. And that is a scenario which I don't see. What I do see is that we have made this progress. The question is, will it survive changes in government in Bangladesh and in India? That is the real test of the relationship. If it is going to be only a function of the government in power, either in Dhaka or in Delhi, then it continues to be a fragile relationship. But if you want to make it a relationship that is rooted in something fundamental, then we must make sure, as citizens, as stakeholders, that we go about our business regardless of who is at the top. That, I think, really is the way to the future. And that leads me to the next point, that we must have stakeholders in both countries. And the stakeholders can be of any type and from any section of society. But we must be clear that government is not the only stakeholder in the success of the relationship. All of us are sitting here. Some may be in government, some may have served in the government, but there are many others who just are thinking intellectuals, experts, scholars, people who think about things. We must have stakeholders in the relationship to broad-base the relationship. And this could include media, business, academia, youth, everyone. And the test of the relationship, or whatever we do, has to be that the people have to be the first and the last beneficiaries. It is important that we keep the eye on the ball and say, why are we doing what we are doing? Is it for the benefit of the people, or is it not for the benefit of the people? We also have to be alert to spoilers and to cynics, and we have to avoid making the relationship hostage to domestic politics. So there will be people on both sides who will either be spoilers, who will try to sabotage, and there will be people who will always be cynical and critical of everything and anything we do. We have to deal with them. They are a reality on both sides, but we have to deal with them. And again, it may not be easy, but we have to do our best to avoid making this relationship hostage to domestic politics. It can be done, and I said, in this regard, time is of great essence. And India, for example, has dealt, because we have no choice, we have dealt with every kind of government in Bangladesh since 1971. I mean, we all know it. And at the end of the day, we have no choice but to deal with whichever government comes to power or is in Dhaka. And likewise, Bangladesh has to deal with whichever government comes into power. I've spoken a little bit about the role of the media, civil society, intellectuals, and influencers. I think it's critical because I think a lot of the things that happen in the relationship, one is the reality of the ground, and the second is the projection and how we view each other, and what are the images that we create of each other. Image of India and Bangladesh, the image of Bangladesh in India. Today, this is the age of information, this is the age of digital technology. Physical borders have lost their earlier significance. There is free flow of information. Social media tools can be weaponized. They can be used both for malign purposes and for benign purposes. We are seeing this all across the world. And therefore, this becomes very, very important. And lastly, I would say we must have and must pursue enlightened self-interest. Because every country works on the basis of self-interest. But the question is whether we can have self-interest coupled with a sense and a concern for the greater good of the region. And I think if we pursue a few of these principles for the way forward, then we should be okay. My own feeling is, having watched this relationship, that from 1971 onwards, it's now been more than 50 years, I would say definitely the relationship appears to be stabilizing. And, Tariq has mentioned the ups and downs and so on. But if we come to some degree of equilibrium between us, if we come to terms with our respective sovereignties, if we come to terms with the realities of interdependence, then we will have a band within which the relationship can move forward. And our attempt should be not to allow the relationship to fall off the band, either on this side or on that side. Certainly not on the negative side. So if we can maintain that broad band of overall trend of improvement in the relationship, then we will be doing justice to the younger generation. And with these words, I just want to end and once again thank all of you for taking time out, and once again to express my very, very deep and personal association and fondness for this country, for its people. I have had the privilege of traveling the full length and breadth of Bangladesh. A lot of my personal life and my best years of my life I have devoted in Bangladesh and towards the relationship from Delhi also. So for me, it's been personally a labor of love, and I really believe in the relationship, and I believe it is critical. Obviously, for Bangladesh, India is critical, but even for India, Bangladesh is critical, and I think it will continue to be even more critical as we go along. And I'm not even getting into specific issues or what we can do in different sectors, because all of you are familiar with that. But these are just some general thoughts of how we can, of what we have achieved and how we can go forward. So with these words, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. But just one thing, my journalistic mind tend to feel, though it's not a question and answer sessions, but I'm privileged to ask you one question. And this one question on you. You served as a young diplomat in late 90s, and in 2014 in January. And another election comes just after 20 days. It's only January 7, and it is only difference of 2 days, or any other thing. What do you think about it?
I'm not going to get into this. No, look. See, and that's what I meant. Time is a great healer. If you look at the political history and constitutional history of Bangladesh, you can make out that it was a new nation struggling to find its systems, its institutions, including how governments will be put into office, how they will be removed. Bangladesh's history has been very, very difficult, and it has gone through a lot of troubles. I would say even India went through, if you look at the first 50 years of India's independence, we fought 4 wars. two prime ministers were assassinated. We went through emergency, we went through reorganization of the states. If you remember, in 1947, the Indian Federation was not formed. It took so many years for the states to be demarcated. There was a problem in Tamil Nadu, there was a problem in the northeast, there were insurgencies, there were separatist movements. So, part of this turbulence which Bangladesh has seen in the first, let's say, 30, 40 years, is just because of a new nation that was born. Now, so I know that elections are important for every country. India will also go for elections in 3 months' time or 4 months' time. What is important is for the people of Bangladesh to realize the best way forward when it comes to election. You know, this problem and this issue used to come up when we were also discussing Afghanistan. And those people who taught us democracy would always talk about democracy in Afghanistan or free and fair elections in Afghanistan. India would say, look, we are a democracy. We are not exporting our democracy. We recognize that every country has its own method, its own system. And I would just say that, you know, as a now a private individual, I'd say watch Bangladesh, that we wish you the best. I mean, you have an election the best way that you can. You have your institutions, you have your media, you have everything. Do the best that you can. Believe in yourselves and accept whatever results that come out of those elections. I don't think it's for any country, including India. I don't think it's for any country in the world to talk about how elections should be conducted either in Bangladesh or in India or in Afghanistan or in any other country. It is a decision to be taken by the people. Otherwise, what is the meaning and concept of independence and of being a sovereign nation? So I would say it's for the people to decide who they elect. It is for the institutions to decide how the election is held. And we will wish you the best in this endeavor. The only thing we hope is that the process goes through as per the wishes of the people, that it is peaceful, does not lead to instability, and that is all. But I don't think anyone has the right, or no one has been given the mandate in today's world to, you know, issue judgments on how a particular election.
Thank you. Big hand for Professor. We'll just hand over the program. 5 minutes the concluding remarks by Tarek Ahmed, and after that there's dinner. Dinner that will serve outside the ballroom. It's a buffet, so you have to take care of Ahmed for concluding remarks. 5 minutes.
Thank you. After that brilliant exposition of his thoughts on the subject, very wide-ranging, very deeply rooted to your own experience of dealing with Bangladesh, like mine was. I don't have too much to add, fortunately. I'll just repeat on one or two things that you mentioned. You mentioned about the primacy of the political will. That has to be at the bottom line of whatever will happen or will not happen in relation. And it so happened that whenever we have been able to solve problems between us, there was a confluence of political, whether whether it is the Ganges conference, then subsequently addressing the border issues, then addressing other ancillary problems which have plagued us. Because I was in Delhi monitoring what was happening in the Lok Sabha as well as my gratification. And I have seen reports of what could not have happened. Despite that, I think I had the confidence in Prime Minister Modi that he would come around that this has to be done, it has to be done. Not just for us, it has to be done for India. And so when the vote tally was being held, in fact, some friends of mine sitting in the Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, were telling me this about progressing, because I have said that. I had invested a lot of myself in ensuring the resolution. Because I was convinced that if we could not do it, at that point of time, it was historical. Because God knows what we would do. God knows what would happen to the other myriad problems. This was, in a sense, the one defining moment which enabled us to move forward. There's so many other things, and we have been making progress everywhere. I repeat the word, work in progress. Nothing comes to a final point. Come to a final point, you discover, oh, I can do so many other things. How do we do it? Number two, discovering that, acknowledging that there's a mutuality of interests. We are what we are now in the era of the nation state, Westphalian nations. In such configuration globally, I've said publicly, there's no such thing as friendship between nations. Every nation has its own national interest. What I would call friendship is where the national interest of both the countries, through mutual discussions, arrive at a mutually agreeable equilibrium point. Nobody is going to walk away with 100%. Each has to feel he has got the best that he holds and he can go and tell the other side. This is in our interest as well as their interest. And I think that is going to be it. So, these are things. The Teen Vigor started in 19. That was a short-term period agreement for a limited hour. The closure of that agreement was in 2011. Exactly. It was held up because both sides would not budge from allowing more than 12 hours. It was just held up from different reasons. You dealt with it. Finally, I decided to visit that spot. We're talking, you mentioned about bridges, etc., being done over flyovers, etc. It was a simple traffic management. Okay, that was my impression. So I crossed to our side from India. I asked the people, for 6 hours or 12 hours, can we not make it 24 hours? Yes, sir, if the order will make it 24 hours, we'll work with the other side and decide who will manage the crossing. I came back this time, talked to the BSF commander, he said exactly the same thing, and they are not consulted in town. I came back and said, why are we talking about flyovers and stuff like that, where you will go into litigation of acquiring acquisition of land? Like Merubari, I still remember that. Went into court for 10 years before we could resolve. I said, if the idea is to have 24-hour access, it's a simple traffic management problem. Just increase the roster of people who will manage the crossing. And it was not. So, given the goodwill, this is the point, there has to be a recognition of mutuality of interests. People tend to things in terms of zero-sum games. There's nothing called zero-sum games if you want to progress in life. Even if you don't like, you have to keep making compromises. compromises are never for self-defeating, practical reasons. And I think we have not yet come to that stage, but I hope we will. That the sovereignty thing will not get us hung up so much into it that we become prisoners to ourselves. There are many issues which defy sovereignty in the Westphalian conflict. And I mentioned the two largest. Right now, our existential threat for both our countries and our people is climate. We will feel the pinch of it, your coastal areas will feel the pinch of it right in the middle. Here we have to learn how to pool ourselves, not steal it. We have to make a distinction. Am I surrendering my sovereignty or am I pooling it with somebody else to address it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone.
We have a very small ceremonial part. I would like to request Mr. Sangbadik to come to the dais to give a small memento. Please bring the memento. And after that, the program will end and the dinner is outside the hall.
Hey.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. With this, we end of this program and the dinner is served outside. Thank you very much for coming here today. And it's a wonderful day and listening to such a wonderful personalities like Mr. Pankaj Sharan and Tarek Ahmed. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Dinner served in outside the hall.